I still remember the way his phone looked on the dresser that Sunday. Black case, a tiny nick at the corner, a grocery list stuck under the magnet. It buzzed while I was folding laundry. The preview popped up like a shutter you couldn't pull down. Can't stop thinking about last night. And the name underneath was hers. Not a coworker, not a stranger. Her name, the wife of his best friend. My chest tightened like someone had tied my ribs with string. For a long second the world did the slow, cruel trick of feeling both very loud and very far away. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the phone. I picked it up with the carefulness of someone handling evidence. Their messages were not discreet anymore. Late-night plans, inside jokes, photos with angles that meant more than coincidence. I could have exploded. People imagine the cinematic fight. Doors, accusations, tears. Maybe that's satisfying in the movies. In real life, that's what lets people hide. I'd seen how panic lets people delete and deflect. I wanted something else. I wanted a response that could not be undone with a practiced apology. So I folded the towel and I put the phone down. He came in, kissed my cheek, and asked if I wanted pizza. I smiled like everything was fine. Inside, I felt the beginning of a plan clicking into place. Not revenge for revenge's sake. Precision. That night I didn't call anyone. I didn't throttle him. I opened a notebook and wrote the first line. Observe, record, protect. If they had chosen to burn 2 families, I would not answer with flames. I would answer with truth and with calm. For the next few weeks, I became very boringly persistent. I bought a plain black notebook and started writing down dates, times, small details. The nights he said he'd work late. The posts she deleted the next morning. Little changes in tone when he said a friend's name. I took screenshots and saved them in a folder labeled Warranty. I backed up those screenshots to a separate drive called Taxes. Naming things boring is a trick. It makes them less likely to be found and more likely to be ignored. I also kept being normal. People underestimate the power of normal. I made coffee in the mornings. I asked about his day. I hugged him. I laughed at jokes I'd heard 1,000 times. Calm fools people. If they thought I didn't know, they kept doing what they'd been doing. If they thought I did know, panic would set in and they'd clean up evidence. So I let them believe whatever eased their nightly choices. I drove by the boutique hotel they both used, the corner cafe, the quiet restaurant downtown. I learned the reservation behaviors and the little patterns that make a life traceable, where they parked, how they used last names on bookings, what times they favored. Once you watch people long enough, you start to see the choreography, the same steps with different partners. I documented it all. I also did something practical. I met with a financial advisor who specialized in family transitions. That might sound cold. It isn't. When someone betrays you, they often try to take what they can. I checked our accounts. I set alerts for big withdrawals. I learned where our names overlapped and where they didn't. I didn't transfer money. I didn't hide assets. I simply made sure I'd be alerted if anything moved. Finally, I scheduled a meeting with a mediator, a neutral person who handles messy human things professionally. I booked a small conference room with glass walls and a kind, steady woman who smelled faintly of peppermint. I booked it under something boring. Household planning. The invitation went to everyone. Innocent, precise, mandatory. That's when the plan really began. I wasn't trying to punish. I was trying to make it impossible for them to hide. People who betray usually believe in their own cleverness. They underestimate the patience of the one they hurt. One Thursday, he told me he had a late client dinner at a restaurant downtown. He said the client's name was Kay. It was casual. I made a mental note. Later, I sat in my car across the street and watched through the restaurant window. He walked in with a confident smile. She slipped into the same place an hour later, hugging the man who was not her husband. Their hands touched in a way that was more than friendly. I didn't walk in. I didn't shout. I took a photo of their reflection in the window. The picture was small, grainy, but it read like a sentence. Two people who should not be touching. At the mediator's room, I laid the pieces out like a patient detective. Reservation confirmations, timestamps, screenshots of messages, a map of overlapping weekends. At the top of the folder, I had written in plain black ink, "This is not a suspicion. This is a record." The air in that room changed when I slid that folder across the glass table. My husband's face drained color. Her husband's hand trembled on his cup. The mediator asked questions with gentle, clinical cadence. My husband's first defense was the old, tired line. "It's not what it looks like." I let the record speak. People believe what they can see. A calendar entry with both names on it, the bill at the restaurant with 2 initials, a string of messages. Those things do not soften under pressure. She froze. He tried to explain. The mediator gave him options: calm separation planning, counseling, or a more public legal route. I gave him the dignity of choice, but not the freedom to rewrite the facts. The other husband, the betrayed friend, stared until his face broke like glass. I felt a sharp human sorrow for him, not for the men who betrayed, but for the honest person caught in their web. His trust had been used as a pillow for deception, and it hurts to see someone wake up on the floor. After the meeting, nothing felt celebratory. There was no gloating on my part, but something else had shifted irreversibly. The secret was now a shared record. Secrets survive by being solitary. Once shared in documented form, they start to have consequences. This is where things get interesting, and where a person decides how much dignity they want to preserve. I had 3 goals: make sure the truth could not be erased, protect my practical life, and let the world do the rest. I did not want to fight. I wanted consequences that felt inevitable, and inevitable because of the truth, not because I forced them. First, documentation. I kept an archive of everything: screenshots, timestamps, copy of reservations, labeled and dated. I stored it in a secure place. I did not post anything on social media. That would be cheap and public, and it would have made me into the person people wanted to watch. This was about removal of the fog, not spectacle. Second, professional boundaries. I contacted his workplace only where it was necessary. I didn't go to his boss with a sob story, but when his behavior started affecting collaborative projects and client trust, I provided facts, documented dates, and missed commitments to the right person. Reputation in adults' worlds often depends on reliability. He had been unreliable in ways he'd hidden with charm. When charm meets paper, charm fades. Third, social context. I quietly told a handful of mutual friends the essential facts, not as gossip, but as a courtesy. People deserve to know when their trust networks are compromised. I framed it calmly. Here are dates and facts. I wanted you to be aware. People react to calm with seriousness. It wasn't about turning people against him. It was about allowing them to choose where to stand. Fourth, strategic silence. When he reached out with dramatic lines and pleading texts, I redirected him to the mediator. I refused arguments. I refused emotional manipulation. He expected a meltdown. He got formality. That drained his momentum. People who behaved like predators often need emotional chaos to survive. When you take that away, they flounder. All these moves are subtle, but they're effective because human systems, workplaces, friend groups, small social networks, favor truth and predictability over drama and secrecy. He had built a life on both lies and the assumption that nobody would dig. I dug. The structure of his life started to wobble not because I tore it down, but because I removed the invisible supports, secrecy and ambiguity. There was a ripple effect. Invitations dried up because people didn't want to be involved in something toxic. Colleagues became cautious because documented unreliability matters in a job. His best friend, the husband of the woman, began to separate himself, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. The man who'd once toasted their team now avoided eye contact. Reputation is social capital. Once it leaks, it's hard to refill. I won't lie. It felt strange to watch. I didn't celebrate in public. I did not post smug updates. Instead, I wrote down small personal victories, a text from a child that said, "Are you okay?" A neighbor who asked gently if I needed help, a friend who sat with me for 3 hours and never asked for the juicy parts. Those were human things, real things. This is the anatomy of a cold victory. You set the facts in motion, then you step back and let the systems do the rest. It's surgical. It's elegant. It costs less of you than it does of them. There is a moment when consequences stop being hypothetical and start being real. For him, that moment came slowly, and in small humiliations he had not expected. It was a Thursday, when the first client gently asked whether he'd be available for a multi-week project. The client had been given a timeline of missed deliverables and unclear communication. The client didn't ask for drama. They asked for consistency. His project manager, who had always admired his charm, now called him and asked for documentation. There was a pause at the other end of the line where charm would normally step in. The charm didn't have the receipts. At a neighborhood barbecue, a mutual friend sidled over to me and said softly, "We're planning a small dinner next week. Would you like to come?" The same friend had not invited him. People do not want to be the third person in a situation with shaky moral ground. Invitations vanish quietly. That is a small social death. It's painful because you don't see it coming until you are left standing in a room wondering why people don't ring your doorbell anymore. He sent a message, a long one, full of apologies and promises. I read it, felt nothing dramatic, and forwarded it to the mediator. The mediator wrote back with professional instructions, documents required, timelines, and steps for formal separation. I copied his workplace only where necessary. I forwarded dates and facts. The responses were administrative. There was no cheering. There was only paperwork slowly turning the life he had into a set of entries in a ledger that could not be charmingly reinterpreted. In other words, his world stopped being held together by plausible stories and required proof. When proof was demanded, he did not have it. That's when he began to lose what people most cherish: trust. This is the part viewers always want to see, the dramatic fall. They expect shouting and flying plates. But the real victory felt quiet, the kind that settles and doesn't require applause. He lost clients who valued reliability more than charisma. His best friend's marriage collapsed under weight he had helped create. That man stopped answering his calls. Invitations from mutual friends stopped coming. People who once made room for his unpredictability chose the safer, quieter path: distance. I did not drive any of those decisions. I did not mastermind every closed door. I placed the facts, presented them calmly, and allowed systems, human, social, professional, to react the way they always do when trust is gone. The result felt like justice, but it wasn't vengeance in the clumsy sense. It was consequence. He had built a life that relied on secrecy. Once secrecy was gone, the scaffolding fell away. We divided things in a mediator's office, not a courtroom. He signed what was required. He was given access only as necessary. There were financial consequences, not dramatic bankruptcies, but the steady loss of future opportunities and the slow pivot of colleagues who preferred steadier hands. Social capital is like currency. Once spent on betrayal, it is hard to recharge. The other husband started to rebuild his life too. That man's gratitude towards me was quiet. He did not ask for spectacle. He wanted facts and dignity. He wanted to be able to explain his choices to his own family without the fog of rumor. I gave him the thing I could, truth laid out logically so he could decide his future without being gaslit. I walked away with things he could not touch. My self-respect, the knowledge that I had handled a betrayal with intelligence, and the slow reclaiming of a home that now matched my values. He had a different loss, a life diminished not by force, but by the steady erosion of people's willingness to attach trust to him. And that is the cold victory. It doesn't make a show. It does, however, leave the betrayer with consequences that last longer than a headline. After the dust settled, the house felt different. There was space where his things had been, yes. But more than that, there was a sense of ordinariness restored. I started to invest in small routines that were only mine. I planted herbs in the windowsill. I signed up for a class I'd always wanted. I slept in a bed that was no longer filled with answers I had to guess at. People sometimes confuse cold victory with cruelty. They are not the same. Cruelty seeks to punish for dishonor. Cold victory seeks to preserve yourself and let the systems of life catch up to the truth. It's surgical, not spiteful. That gave me a kind of peace I hadn't expected. The cost of all of this was real. 2 families were hurt because of choices they made. That stung. The other husband lost trust but not dignity. He rebuilt slowly and in time found a steadier life. That was not my business to orchestrate. I did my job. I made sure truths were clear and choices were possible. If you're listening and you suspect someone is building a life on deceit, do this. Document quietly, protect your practical life, seek professional advice, and present the truth in a way that doesn't make you small. Don't become the person you'll regret being. Don't feed the rumor mill. Let the truth be surgical. Let the world's natural systems, friends, colleagues, work, react. That is often more powerful than any scream. And lastly, you are not defined by what others take from you. You are defined by how you choose to live after. I chose clarity. I chose dignity. I chose myself. He had no idea what was coming, and that was the point. Not because I delighted in his fall, but because he had made a choice. I made mine. Mine was to remain steady, precise, and unbroken. If there's one thing I learned, it's that revenge doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes, the coldest, cleanest victory is simply letting the truth do the damage. I didn't destroy him. I just stopped protecting him, and the world did the rest. If my story made you feel something, hit subscribe, because I have more. Real stories, real betrayal, real justice. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Thank you for listening. And remember, you don't have to scream to win.